we have all people taken their places already, and we can get started. We only have 2 hours for this session. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and on behalf of our academy, I'm delighted to welcome you to this session. We are also extremely delighted to see our speakers here. We thank the speakers and the audience. So judging by the size of the audience, we can see that this is a topical matter. This is the second time we're having this event discussing the open scientific matters, and Gaidar Forum has not become the forum for discussing these matters just by chance. This is the place where we discuss trends which determine development of the entire world. And last year, within the framework of Gaidar Forum, we managed to bring together a unique number of scientists who work with big data and open data repository issues. We have come up with our proposals regarding building open scientific and research infrastructure, and this year we're broadening up the range of the topics we discuss. We are talking about scientific communication, communication between scientists. So what benefit this system can bring to the state from the standpoint of innovation and strategic planning, how can the scientists and scientific community benefit from it, how can the business community benefit from it. So we have again a unique panel of speakers. We have representatives from the state, from the business community like Alexei Gusev and Sergei Matveyev from the State Department. They are one of the best representatives of the open science. Ivan Zasursky, Sergei Semechkin, Dmitry Malkoff, and we also have people like Igor Osipov, who is a digital scientist, and information management is unthinkable without people like this. These people are developing scientific tools which help process scientific information. And also I would like to welcome our foreign speakers like Greg Gordon, Michael Taylor, and we have Martin Roylands joining us via Skype. And I will just give you an outline of our agenda today. So we are going to have 3 stages of our discussion. First, we'll talk about changes made to scientific communication. The second module will be about big data. Who is generating big data? How can the state benefit from using big data from the standpoint of making strategic decisions? And we will have an official presentation of Dimensions. That's a product developed by Digital Science. Several days ago, this company has officially presented its product in Russia, and within the framework of our third module, we will talk about open science in general today. So again, thank you very much for coming here today. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm welcoming you to this discussion, and let's have a fruitful talk. And with that, without further ado, I would like to give word to Ivan Zasursky, who will be co-moderating this session.
Yes? Да? Да, вы все слышите? Yes?
Can you hear us all properly? So, as you know, we have chosen a specific format for this discussion, and we have speakers who have something to say about each of the subtopics. So my major task today is to watch the time, to make sure that none of the speakers uses up the time allocated for the entire discussion. So so please be mindful of the time frames, and let me announce all 3 subtopics first. So we will be mainly talking about 3 things. The first one is, to what extent did scientific communication system change today? So we'll be talking about the change trends. So we have also big data to talk about. And how does big data impact decision-making process, and how does that affect innovation-based policy and process of innovation? And we have the third subtopic, which is called open science. And the question we are asking ourselves in this module, what opportunities for scientific communications are provided by the new media platforms? So let's start talking about scientific communication first. And the question I'm asking to all the speakers, and one of our speakers is Dmitry Malkoff, who is representing Kiberlenenka as the CEO. We have Mike Taylor, Metrics Director of Altmetric, and we have Martin Rollins, the head of Publishing Innovation Department of Springer Nature. He's located remotely, so we're in contact, let's say, electronically via Skype. So Dmitry Malkoff, I would request your comment first. So here is the question. To what extent do you think the system of scientific communication has changed today? So you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. I'm Dmitry Malkoff, and let me start with looking at the origins of this question. Human communication is about speed. And as we can see, technological advances have become information easily accessible by a bigger number of people. So that has sped up our communication process. But we cannot say the same thing about scientific communication, as the speed of its communication just begins to creep up. And now we realize that to make sure that our society develops, we need to speed up. We need to accelerate. We need to accelerate the exchange of ideas and exchange of knowledge. And gradually, we come to a consensus among consumers and providers of scientific content. And this consensus becomes a foundation for various initiatives. So thanks to consumers and thanks to providers of scientific information, this system is getting more and more open. It becomes available to a bigger number of people, and this is how information changes into knowledge. Within the framework of all these initiatives, which are not always legal, by the way, but these initiatives are rather about speed than anything else, and they are truly fast. And they're becoming more and more widespread, not only among researchers, but also among routine consumers of scientific information. So openness, transparency, easy access to this information has become a routine thing. And this is especially true for young people. Information is 2 clicks away from any young person. Even if this information is stored in libraries or if it is stored in old-fashioned publishing platforms where you need subscriptions, it is anyway within 2 clicks away. So that means that information is not getting converted into knowledge for these young people. So this originating consensus helped us to make available more than 30% of our publications. It's like 1.5 millions of different publications. So technology means speed in these cases. 22 million people read more than 100 different articles and publications within last year. So that indicates a success, and big investors are becoming increasingly interested in the project, and their involvement is quite inspiring. It is inspiring us to scale up this practice worldwide, but building a new system of information, of scientific information, global system, is a great challenge, as we believe. We truly believe that in order to be up to this task, we need to ensure 2 things. First and foremost, we we've got to make sure that the system is transparent and it is trusted. It's trustworthy. 2 years ago, we were talking about exactly the same thing. We said that we have to ensure transparency and trustworthiness of this system. So regardless of, so we've got to make it transparent, no matter what angle you look at it from. And we've got to lean on our legacy and heritage. We need to involve publishers into creating this ecosystem. Publishers should have their own place in this system. So existing technology helps, existing technology makes it available. I'm not only talking about just communication, and we are communicating to achieve consensus. We do believe that based on this concept, we will be able to build an infrastructure of a new type which will help resolve a lot of challenges of present day scientific communication. We can reduce the cost. We can ensure availability of this information for everyone. That would automatically mean speed of information exchange. Talking about blockchain, blockchain can help manage digital rights. Blockchain can help to ensure copyright, and it can help with a greater number of different things. So if we have if the underlying technology is trusted, we can ensure trustworthiness and transparency of the system, and we will get lots of other benefits from this. We will be able to make research more efficient. We can avoid, we will resolve the challenge of reproducing the results of scientific experiments made elsewhere. Just to wrap up, I would like to address the key question asked by the moderator of the session. So, to what extent has the scientific communication system changed today? And what will happen in the future? Scientific communication is becoming increasingly faster, but not as fast as we would like it to be. And quoting our moderator, our society is stalled on its way to the noosphere. And we are stalling ourselves, in fact. And in order to step up, in order to get access to a completely new, let's say, bandwidth of speed, we need new infrastructure. And this infrastructure needs to lean on existing systems, on existing heritage. We are quite optimistic about the prospects of this system. It will become real. It will come true, and this will mainly happen due to emerging consensus and due to technological development. And we can see that technology is developing at extremely fast pace. So we are living through very interesting times. Thank you. Thank you very much. So what's happening with the scientific communication system? So we are moving towards consensus, and that move is assisted by technological development. And Sergey is saying that we're already there, but he's a bit ahead of time. We've got Mike Taylor here, metrics director of Almetrics. This is the company which is like Kiberleninka. It has become a name in itself. But I'll ask Mike Taylor the same question. To what extent do you think the scientific communication changed today?
Mike has prepared the presentation, so let's give him a second to get ready.
4,000 years ago, you push the button. Okay, there you have it. 4,000 years ago, there was a revolution in the way that European technology was being exploited. A group of travelers arrived at the north of the British Isles, and they were in search of metals. And when one of their number died, he was buried in a significant spot. He was buried overlooking the hills and the valleys of the northern moors. He was buried with the tools of his trade. the ability to create fire, the ability to work metal, and he was wearing one of the finest pieces of gold jewelry ever to be found from the Stone Age period. These travellers were revolutionaries. They had come to the northern moors to look for metal. They had heard somehow, whether it was through stories or through examples, that there was metal to be found here, that there was lead to be worked. And 2,000 years after the start of the Bronze Age, the Romans came to the same site. They knew about the metals there, and the Roman interest in the British Isles was largely driven by their need for metals. They were looking for tin in the south, they were looking for copper in the west, and in the north they were looking for the lead. The Romans were there for 400 years, and they developed a whole system of infrastructure, socio-economic wealth. And over the course of the 400 years that followed the Romans, the mines started to run empty and fall into disarray. But down in the south of the country, there were new industries starting based around the Renaissance. So in the 1600s, we saw a growth of new abilities to communicate research being founded across Europe and in fact across the world. In Oxford, there were coffee shops opening, there were journals starting, there were newspapers being opened up. And these journals and these coffee shops democratized the way that we talked about science. It moved research away out of the closed monasteries and away from the private conversations and into the public arena for the first time. And after 350 years after the start of the Renaissance, those innovations that were founded in the 1600s still persist. We still have coffee shops, the same coffee shop in Oxford in this case. We have the same newspapers and we have the same journals. Newton's letters can still be found in the philosophical transactions, highly tweeted about in this case, highly tweeted about and highly cited. But science is not separate from society. It exists alongside it. It answers society's needs. It is funded by society. And just as society evolves and requires new needs, so that we expect to see scientific communication and scientific research changing alongside with it. In 2015, hardly anyone had heard of the Zika virus, but at the beginning of 2016, it was being identified as being one of the greatest threats to human health in Latin America that we had seen for many years. There was no publications, there was no research, there was no funding. But by the end of 2016, the funding had taken place. We had seen thousands of researchers turn to Zika as a field. We had seen publications. We had seen the research being shared in public media in a way that we have never seen before. And at the beginning, only a year ago, we could see the CDC, we could see the World Health Organization reflecting on the research that they had funded in the preceding year and making recommendations on how we treat Zika, how we resolve Zika. And in fact, a year ago, the Zika emergency was declared over. This was a revolution in the way that we dealt with research, and it was a revolution in the way that we could see research unfolding before our very eyes. This is science taking place in the open. We can see the funding decisions, we can see the publications, we can see the citations, we can see the researchers who are being funded and who are working in this field. We can see the discussions, we can see the entries in Wikipedia. We see the impact of the research in immediate time. The question of this is whether, how do we change scientific research? And my answer is that is changing already, just as Dmitry was saying. We have seen how societies have changed the way that they talk, and we will see increasingly how science reflects that communication, how we move science from the closed academy to the public forum. So my answer is not what do we do to change it, but rather how do we develop to make the best opportunities of the changes that are happening anyway. Thank you.
That was very good. Thank you very much. And quite picturesque as well. Thank you very much. So we have now electronic contact. Yes? So how can we see him? Can we see him, do you think? We have a next speaker. Hello.
Hello. This is my time.
Yes, hello. Great to hear from you. We have a question.
I don't know whether you can see me, but
no, we cannot. So yes, now we can see. Now we can see. Great. Great. Yes, it's you.
Good.
Yes.
It is I.
Yes.
From a very windy and stormy Amsterdam.
Yes, we have the
So
same here.
sorry, I can't be there.
It's okay. Basically, we have the first part of the section where each speaker answers the question. So the question we have is, how has scientific communication changed today? So what is your take on that?
Yeah, well, my story isn't going to be as nice and descriptive as Mike's. But I think what I see, if I look back over the past 5 years or so, there's a lot that has changed. And in my opinion, this all started a little bit around the time that the large mega journals started. So, for example, PLOS ONE, and then also later, of course, many others joined, like Scientific Reports. The trouble with those journals is that you had a lot of different disciplines united with within one journal, so the impact factor of that particular journal would sort of render meaningless, because it would have a different meaning for each of the disciplines. If you look at the impact factor, the average number of citations in, for example, neuroscience, it's very high, whereas in social science it's lower. So, but the impact factor of the journal would all be the same. And so you saw that we're slowly looking for different metrics, and that also tied in with the change in research dissemination channels. So over the past 5 years, we've seen the growth of Twitter and Facebook, but also of online platforms, and I think internet as a whole. And so what you see is that the researchers followed suit. Where we initially only saw the scholarly citations being the measure of quality, we now see that researchers also disseminate their research via non-scholarly citations, via blogs, via patents, via social media, via the news. They actively reach out to news media, and even in policy documents. And so that came to a very difficult question, because what does an article make a big impact? Is that one then still with many citations, or one that's widely discussed on the social web? Or is it one with many downloads, or perhaps the one that was discussed on CNN or any other news channel? And I think the answer to that is really that we'll have to look at the combined effort of all these outputs. All these metrics combined will tell you what's the impact of that particular article. Now, of course, that's all well and good, and we could do that, but that only works if we also see funders and governments following that. And so what we saw over the past couple of years is that there are a number of initiatives that were born. We have the Berlin Declaration starting in 2003. Then the DORA came along, the Declaration on Research Assessment, the Leiden Manifesto, the Hague Manifesto. And they all want to say, hey, hang on, there's more than only citations. There's more than the impact factor. We have to change the way that we evaluate researchers and look at what their actual footprint is. And to me, that is particularly a valuable point also because I'm responsible in part for the books. And so all of what I've said so far counts for journal articles. Most of the journal articles are indexed in the old school abstracting and indexing databases like Scopus and Web of Science. But the majority of the books aren't actually indexed at all. And that's a pity, because I think books are also valuable. And there we also want to see what actually happened, and authors are struggling with that. And they often don't get any recognition from faculty, university administrators, and funders. And that's quite particular. So, can I continue?
Yes, yes, obviously you can.
Okay, good. I thought I was interrupted. Good. So that's quite particular, because if we look at the books that we publish, they are very much alive. So the books that were published in 2016, they had been cited, and we're talking about a large number, 11,000 books. 25% of these books already had been cited once or more, and 42% of these books had been mentioned online on Twitter, Facebook, or blogs, polished documents, etc. And actually, I did a little research to see whether that also resonates in Russia. And so, if we look at all the books that have been published with Springer Nature by Russian authors or editors, we're talking about the book authors, not chapter authors, and book editors. We see in total we have roughly 2,500 authors, and they also have a lot of citations. Nearly 35 citations per book, over 6,000 downloads on average, and 0.6 online mentions on average per book. So there are a number of aspects there. So we see that the citation, the impact factor is slowly losing the impact that it had originally, and that the article level metrics are more important. At the same time, you see that there's a diversification. Of course, we've been publishing books for long, but I think they are still very relevant and part of the scientific communication.
Okay, you have half a minute.
Also Sorry?
You have like half a minute.
Half a minute. I was rounding up there, so that's
okay.
Perfect. And then the last one, I think there are new ones already knocking on the door, like data, code, video. So what I see is a change from only articles and citations to a broadening of the communication to all sorts of output and a subsequent evaluation on that.
Okay, so before you switch off, maybe some people, может быть, есть какие-то вопросы?
Maybe you have any questions. I'd like to use my role as the moderator to ask questions
for you. So stay a little longer. My question to you, since you're a bookworm, since you're dealing with books, I have a question. The books are changing. The book form is evolving, and there are all sorts of initiatives that see a book as a living sort of organism. Unlike the previous time where we would publish it and forget about it, now more and more people are thinking that it should be a living sort of evolving form, a different kind of format. Do you see any movement here? What do you do at Springer to take it into account, this development?
There are a number of things that we have to distinguish here. First of all, books are very diverse. So, for example, in social science, you still have to publish a book to get a PhD in many universities. You see a little bit changed because at the end of the day, the faculties are evaluated based on the citations to articles. So that's, they might be pushing towards articles rather than books. At the same time, you still need a sort of a place where you consolidate your information. So you have your articles and then your reviews, and somehow you have to come to a consensus. And I think that is now, and that will be the role for the book. What we do see is that you get more live data. So we have living references, living books. so the author and the editors can update the content while time moves along and new articles are published. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, so есть какие-нибудь еще вопросы к нашему спикеру?
Other questions to our speaker because he can turn himself off at any time.
Вот, если нет вопросов.
So if there are no more questions to the speaker,
we have some more minutes for this, and then we move to the next topic. Есть ли кто-то, кто хотел бы вот?
Is there anyone who would like to make a comment on this topic? And the topic is, to what extent do you think the scientific communication has changed as of today? If no, then yes, please make sure you speak into the microphone and please be brief. My name is Pavel Arefyev from the Scientific and Electronic Library of RANEPA, Russian Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. Scientific communication has not changed a great deal, because, and our colleague from Springer has just mentioned it, communication is shifting from magazine domain, from the domain of, let's say, institutional press. It is shifting to Facebook, and other types of social media. So professional media is getting created. So we had, let's say, books early in 1970s, publications about social sciences, proper quality publications, proper methodology. Those were great books, really well written. Most of them were published based on material which was collected in the smoking room. So a lot of information was discussed there. How do we run experiments? What results do we get? So then you take this information and you take it to the lab and then you do something with it. The process looks somewhat the same now. That's the way we produce scientific knowledge. There is, let's say, a scientific institution, a research gate, or a think tank, or a university. They generate information, which is not emotional at all. But there are also smoking rooms, and there are also Facebook and other social media. You can post something there, then you can regret about posting it, and so there was standard interactions among scientists, and the interaction remained the same, but the media had slightly changed. Well, let me express my view. I'm anxious about what was just said. Angry, actually. Is it a question to me? If it is a question to me, no. You ask it later, because we have time allocated for discussion, and that's in the end of the panel session. And still we have one of our speakers on the phone. Probably somebody would like to make a comment, but I wouldn't want to start discussion now. Sergey, and you are speaking against another topic. It's about big data and the impact big data has upon decision-making process. But you can start with expressing your anxiety. When we try to copy the experience of collecting information in smoking rooms and paste it into the social media environment, that's a mistake to do it. Scientific communication has changed by all means, but the more important question is, why has it changed? And nobody tried to answer this question among those present here. I think that the reason is, before, in order to get scientific knowledge, you had to develop a study, and there has to be some interest in this study. But we have passed this point now. To get new scientific knowledge, it is not enough to get just something interesting. We need to use data and knowledge which was generated by other people. Now, knowledge creates more knowledge. So scientific communication has become a prerequisite for developing of existing science. So we need to keep throwing fresh ideas and fresh brain into the system to make sure that the system goes, to keep it in motion. Before, knowledge had to be reproduced, and only if reproduced it created social value, and this reproduction required engineers, process engineers, and so on and so forth. And so there was a barrier between the society and the scientist. After digital technologies became widespread, they obliterated all these intermediaries. So that barrier has been lifted immediately. Now knowledge automatically creates social value, and that's the key aspect. Starting from the 16th century, society was capable of finding ways to make sure scientists communicate. And copyright issues appeared in 16th century. Society responded to this need, so they started to build libraries. In the 19th century, we face copyright bureaus, and during the industrial development era, patents started to develop. But it is not fitting this new paradigm. Knowledge creates knowledge, and then knowledge creates social value very quickly. So when we talk about scientific communication, we need to be talking about the ratio between knowledge in the public domain and private domain. So how much does the society have? How much does the author have? Can the author ban something, ban this knowledge from being used? So these are the questions to be answered. But from the technological perspective, we have everything we need. So we have Facebook, we have social media, and we have big data. And the question is, how does big data affect the process of making strategic decisions? And the answer is very simple. It doesn't. So it means strategic decisions are being intuitively made. And I've got to add a bit more detail to what you've just said, since I've just have a minute and a half left. No, you have more. Please carry on. Why do we build connection between big data and AI? Because big data in itself does not have value. It is only valuable after it is processed. I don't just mean processing this data technologically. I mean representing this data in a visual and clear form. So why have we started to talk about it all of a sudden? Simply because the knowledge and data life cycle has become a point instead of a line, and the cost of mistake is going up significantly. If we choose the wrong direction of research, that means that we're getting we are failing, and it will be impossible to correct this failure because the acceleration is far too high. So that's the bad news. But the good news is this: the cost of mistake is really high, and it is impossible to take one step back and correct this mistake. That means that these windows of opportunities are appearing really quickly. So it is very important for us to know that big data is not a cure for all problems. It's a way to diagnose your strategic decisions. Big data is not affecting process of making decisions. Decisions are still being made by people, and people have rational and irrational components. So let's say we're sitting at a table which is made of wood, and that's a great material, but society needs plastic. So here is your strategic choice, choosing between wood processing industry and plastic industry. So here is the decision to make, but big data can help you to make this decision. It can help you spot windows of opportunities in this volume of data. When we take strategic decisions, we should always be aware about the state of our system. So let's say we want to pick priorities for scientific and technological development of the Russian Federation. Last year, the president has signed up the law and the concept. How did we pick them? There were various ways to pick them. But now we have a different problem. We are totally unaware about the state of our scientific and technological system. So big data is the answer to this question. Not only it helps you understand in which direction you should go, it gives you information about the state of your own system. And when we represent this data in a form which is clear, then it helps make decisions. And then you can have a strategic, let's say, a strategy which will be shared and agreed by with the society. This is what our foreign speakers talked about. There is a big number of metrics which help to bring this knowledge into a broader context and explore the true consequences of all sorts of moves. No, you may be right, but there is one thing here. High-tech exports are growing in Russia. So both in pieces and in monetary terms. So we have that. So as high-tech exports is growing, at the same time, research and development cost are not growing at all. The growth is just 1.1%. In the cost of innovation has also stalled. You do not see this correlation in any other country in the world. It looks like we are using the stockpiled technologies. So the question is, where does this technological transfer take place? Where does it originate from? So, and this is where big data steps in, helps analyzing payment data, transaction data, and Dmitry mentioned several ways of processing data. All of them are worth trying in order to explore synergy potential. Okay, thank you very much. That's a very optimistic outlook. And so let's move on. And our next speaker is Dmitry Malkoff, the head of Scientific Communications Center. So the question is, how does big data affect the process of making strategic decisions? So our regulators said that it doesn't impact it at all, but on the other hand, he's mentioned that it helps to diagnose different stages of the process. Dmitry, the floor is yours. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. So I would like to outline my scope first, let's say, in order not to trespass. We are dealing with scientific communication issues, not from the standpoint of ensuring scientific communication between scientists. We are ensuring communication between scientists and society and representative of state bodies. So it's science to society communication. So, and I've just recently became aware of all the digital implications of this, and together with Mike Taylor, we started working on this. So digital science is focused on ensuring data availability, on ensuring analytical capabilities in, again, analytical sphere. But there are good exceptions, like altmetrics is a very good exception. It helps us see how science is being represented in other sources of information and non-academic sources of information, like social media, mass media, Wikipedia, and all sorts of things. So these sources are monitored by Altmetrics. Why do we need to monitor these sources of information? Simply because it gives you a very good idea about the impact of your scientific research, and this impact can be seen long before your work starts being cited by other scientists. So once your subject is being picked up, once people start believing that it has potential and it is significant, they start referring to it, and Altmetric is picking up these references. So together with our colleagues, we expressed interest in Altmetric, and that finally resulted in us completing the first research with the help of Altmetric. We benchmarked 100 publications of Russian research educational institutions. So we have taken 100 publications of leading Russian educational institutions for 7 years, and we put them into the Altmetric system. And what was the result of that, by the way? I'm just getting there. Unfortunately, I can't show you the presentation. I didn't know that presentations were allowed at the session. So, but for details, I would like to refer you to our website. There is a copy of this report available there. But first and foremost, we were interested in how focused are communications departments of different universities and institutes on ensuring this citation index. How do they ensure awareness of public over the work done by the university? And we found a very interesting correlation. Those educational establishments which have good PR departments and which are focusing on the PR activities, they have better scores in Altmetric. And we were astonished to see that Moscow Physical and Technological University has outpaced Moscow State University in their citation score, because they're focusing on ensuring proper press releases. So that the focusing on these things works. So when you focus on promoting your scientific publication, you get an upshot from this, and your organization also benefits from it. So, but the question is, why is it so important? If we talk about intellectual level, then today I can say that any scientist can try to shy away from the public, but in the view of growing competition in science, it is becoming increasingly difficult because finance is scarce and communication can become your competitive advantage. It can help you grab a grant away from your competitors. So scientists do not face a lot of choice here, and especially talking about our Western colleagues, their framework contracts and the application for financial application goes together with your communication plan, and you need to come up with a really good plan with breakdown of these results. And they differentiate between communicating during conferences and communication with public. So if you are not ready to do this, then you're not likely to get this money. And we're getting there slowly.
This question to our heads of foundations that give grants to researchers. So I think we can find this information in proper places. Yeah. So this was about individual level. Speaking about the organizational level, such organizations as universities and the institutes that thrive on young talent, to them, failure to use broad communication channels without communicating with the audience, it would become for them not just a lost opportunity, but also a simple silliness, because any higher education establishment cannot survive without that, and because of that, Altmetric is an excellent tool that can be used to evaluate the operations of those institutions, universities, and individual scientists. Well, that's it. Well, if we apply what you said to the question at hand, you say that big data is not just a dead matter. It's something that needs to be worked actively on, especially in terms of presentation. And these data are formed through the effort of all the players that are oriented toward this public space. And the more people work on that, the better the results. Yes, you can summarize what I said like this. So I'd like to turn it over to the next speaker, Mr. Alexey Gusev, who is the Director for Innovations from RVK. Not quite correctly. Let me ask you to put my presentation after Igor Osipov's presentation, because so you want to completely destroy Osipov, right? No, I just want to expand on certain things that Mr. Osipov is going to speak about. So turn off the microphones, yours and your neighbors. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. I need the clicker, because in order to stay on time, I'll have to ask for the next slide all the time. So because all of us have gotten here in this hall of the Academic Council, let's have a short session of the Academic Council about dimensions. Next slide. Digital science is a part of Holzbeck Publishing Group. It's a large agglomerate with British and German roots. And if we look at the large picture, then the digital science as part of this holding company deals with big data. And in our view, the research process looks like this. The past and current state of the process is tracked by publications and citations, and to some degree by patents. But as we can see, there is a number of other elements that so far we do not see as connected together in the data that are present that circulate within the scientific community. So what we would like to do, and it was our task, is just click and go clicking. What we would like to do is this. We would like to see to what extent we can change the following situation. Just keep clicking. Whether we can change the current market situation, change toward it being more open, toward the info sphere, so that we can grant the maximum opportunity to those people and institutions and universities that want to be involved in innovation. So these three tasks, in my view, we, the digital science, tried to tackle in our Dimensions project. So our primary task was to remove the barriers that Sergey talked about without knowing about dimensions, but it was the task that we tried to complete. Next slide. How did we go about it? There are 6 companies within digital science. They are very small companies, each of them established by a scientist. We are not a corporate structure, a scary corporate structure with horrible corporate practices. They are just smart guys in spectacles that have established. They are working on a phenomenal piece of data that we decided to merge together and see what we get as a result. We had patents, about 100 million patents. In other places, we had access to metadata, legal access from all the largest publishers. In other places, we had a phenomenal data body of data on grants and so on. So what we got was this. In order for this task, in order not to be alone tackling this task and then putting this black box in front of the academic council, metrics and rules of the game. So we asked all the distinguished colleagues of ours in the world, and these are people who were involved in the development of the platform. We also invited a lot of Russian players to share their expert opinions, their expertise with us, and get involved in the development of the platform. Among them, you can see very familiar faces. if we look at the two other large platforms that all of you are familiar with, they were suggested without the involvement of the Russian party, and it was important. What was important for me here was that Russia played an important role, a significant role. About 10% of all partners were from Russia. So the opinion of the Russian community was taken into account rather seriously. Go on clicking. So what did we get? Starting on the 15th of January 2018, we released into open domain, not just temporarily, but it will stay like this forever, open forever, about 86 million publications and searched by metadata, and about 800 million, over 800 million references created in them. All of this was done in order to have our community, to enable our community to start working in an open info sphere, at least as far as publications are concerned. Is this the only thing that's there? No. We wanted to link together all the elements that you can see on the screen. We wanted to link them together into a single interconnected system so that we could see all the cross references between various parts of this phenomenal puzzle called scientific information. So on a large scale, if we look at the data beyond dimensions, we didn't know how to call this. It's not an index, it's not, so I invite you to come up with a name. We have grants, patents, clinical studies, metadata publications. So this mass, this body of data is gigantic, not just large, and it's interlinked. If we look at the next slide, we have about 4 billion internal cross-references that link together all this data. Next slide. So I would like to preemptively address the question of what kind of data it is and how can we work with them. We have specialized analytical reports that were created for this purpose, and you can see the architecture of this process there. From the standpoint of representativeness, it's a unique thing again. Grants, for instance, by grants, Russia holds very honorable 4th place from the standpoint of representativeness of the information available in the public domain. From the standpoint of publications, we are working on it. You can see all the important players. They are in small font. Patents-wise, we are also doing a lot. There we are going to be able this year to provide the information to all of you. So this is what dimensions look like. I just wanted you to get an idea of its looks. And on the next slide, if we throw in the word nanotubes as the keyword to be used in searches, so that's what we get in terms of publications, patents, and clinical studies. On the next slides, you can see the number of patents, which is growing, as well as the number of publications. Here you can see grants that were issued for these topics. And the last thing I would like to show you, what is it? It's the completion of the funding on nanotubes, or is it something that Sergey talked about? Are we looking at optimization here? The number of research, the amount of research is growing, but the funding stagnates. So this is something that decision makers need to be aware of and address. So I tried to be as fast as I could, and I'm ready to take your questions during the Q&A session. I hope it was not, it can't be treated as commercial. So you are within the life cycle of nanotube. So is your database global, or you can give us with abstracts for individual countries? Indeed, we can. So everything is in English. Everything is translated from Japanese, from Russian, from English, from all languages. So, and this machine translation is quite good, but no one can see it. So it's always there. You can always get a link to the original and see how good our translation is. So thank you for the presentation. It's one of the diagnostic systems. If we were to support Sergey, we have one deferred presentation of Alexey Gusev, director. No, let me introduce myself. My position has a very difficult name. I am the Director for Development of Innovative Systems, and I'll try to answer the question that's the title of our session. And after Igor's presentation, it will be a little bit easier for me to talk. An example was given of a tool using which big data can be integrated into a management mechanism to manage science and venture capital. What do I mean? In principle, the hype around big data and around this topic in general has been there for about 5 years, at least 5 years. And we can say that in all areas things have changed, because the most difficult part is not to invent a tool, but to make sure that the tool leads to something, leads to correct strategic decisions. So the bottleneck is not in the algorithms of analyzing big data, but rather in decision making, to analyze how decisions are made in light or in view of that information. So if we take the Russian venture company, it's the government-sponsored Institute of Development. I must emphasize it's a pretty classical institution that exists in many countries of the world in the form of either foundations or agencies supporting innovative development. So in Russia, as a minimum, for 3 years since 2014. I remember back then we had a conversation about innovation dashboard or control panel. A great amount of data had been accumulated in all sorts of support measures of high-tech companies, such as high-tech experts that Sergei referred to, support to universities, for all the measures that the government used to support innovation. It's not only it's not a Russian problem only. It's a problem for most countries that pursue such policies. So in third world countries, they don't have such policies, because this kind of policies is not very urgent. But in Russia, it is urgent, and this digital dashboard, its existence, speaking in IT speak, dashboards have been there for a long time in many ministries, Ministry of Economics, Ministry of Education, and so on. But there were multiple approaches to this task. But I can say that things were fully implemented at any individual place, so that I could put this dashboard on the screen and show you how spending to support universities impact high-tech experts. Unfortunately, such a model in its pure form, this model hasn't been computed yet. What I'm driving at, I'm saying that such projects as, for example, Dimensions or other projects that collect information from grantors, or even projects that open up access to publications, they all lead to a situation when the probability of a correct analysis of this data, by analyzing them, we improve the probability of making correct managerial decisions. I can tell you, a few years ago there was a demand, there emerged a demand for such mechanisms, and now we have certain options for the answer. Now we're getting tools that cannot be clearly described in terms of how we're going to use them. My other thought that I would like to share with you, in the case of Dimensions, it's a good illustration. It's a pretty good illustration. What I see as important is that people are walking their mile to meet us, is a cooperation on the part of monopolies, meaning publishing houses, because they are the losing parties in the change of science. But some publishers are already starting to understand that if they, instead of countering this trend, try to get on top of it, they'll be among those who will get a chance to structure a new landscape for managing research information that no one still understands the final shape of. But those people who will be willing to experiment and try to work with various open formats, various forms of open research data. So these publishers, these publishing houses will most likely retain their influence on the picture that we'll have in the future, because being monopolies, as has been the case for the last 30 years, it would be rather strange if we could sustain such a situation. So in view of these new emerging tools, an unexpected thing is the kind of influence that open research data, especially data on grants, their influence not on research as such, but on venture business, because I represent one, the Russian company. I'm sure that many foundations would be much better off making their decisions if they had a general, a common database on all grants, not just for Russia, but for the entire world, so that we could exercise an aggregated approach. And then the effectiveness of investment into various technologies, and that's what we are interested in as a government agency managing innovation, and from the standpoint of effectiveness or profitability of various funds, I believe that the effectiveness would have grown if such aggregated mechanisms were in existence. And that they're emerging now, it's a very positive development. I need another 30 seconds. You know, the last optimistic thing that I want to wrap my presentation up with is this. Today, we are discussing various aspects of open research data here in Russia at Gaidar Forum. So this fact illustrates that in spite of a relatively low share of the GDP that we invest in science, especially compared with South Korea, who invest more than 4%, R&D in general, not just science. But here it certainly depends on how you calculate the numbers. So we'll turn to that. Then you won't be able to travel abroad if you do your calculations. Well, that's likely. In spite of the rather low indicators on many parameters that we work with, from my personal point of view, maybe because it's in my job description. This system of innovation, maybe it's not quite perfect yet, but it's there at least. And the fact that Russia, as Igor mentioned, 10% of partners of the platform came from Russia, I think it speaks volumes. And first of all, it is evidence that we have a culture, we have interest toward open data. We need to move on to a new methodology and to get a new picture. And having a history of the Soviet science behind us, we might be better off than some Anglo-Saxon countries that have a different culture. But you know, if we take a look from the other side of the pond, you know, Sci-Hub, many of you are familiar. It's a complicated example. It is not customary to discuss it in a serious manner because it's a resource that you cannot call by the name. But nevertheless, the founder of this resource, this lady, although she had to ban Russian users from her resource, but I think this resource grew in the Russian culture of open research data. Let's be straight, she's a communist.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm pointing to. And so, but she comes from the Soviet system, yes. So with this history, with this story in mind, I think we can fairly confidently say that we can become one of the pioneers in transition to the new picture of scientific communication. Okay, thank you very much. But just mentioned that you mentioned monopolies, and we all agree that monopolies will face the diminishing clout and influence. When we talk about some centers of innovation, management or control. That's just another form of monopoly. When Sergey is mentioning that they are facing, let's say, a spike in some new technologies, that probably mean that new innovative centers originated there. They are taking some initiatives or they are drawing finances from somewhere, and that causes a spike in activity. This is why open data is so much important. Not only big data, but it should be big and open, because now we have no idea who is going to make decisions. System is heavily decentralized, and every economic agent can work to his or her interest, and it's about relations between the public and private. So we need to make sure that at any level of scientific communication, people would have as much information available as possible to support their decision-making process, to make their decision efficient and proper quality. And then we'll see the chance to see the 1,000 flowers in blossom, as Mao said before. So even though, well, I'd like to make another comment. For Russia, I would say this is the only opportunity, because you need to focus in order to bring a product into the market. And Russia has 146 million people, and we have very vast territory, and the population density is very, very small. But this audience is packed, as you can see. That's true. So digital systems and digital communication platforms for us is the only way to ensure to focus our intelligence on particular things. So we have culture for that. We can overcome the challenge of the vast territory that we have. Just a question to Sergei Matveyev. I don't want to get myself published in UBOR and AFIG. So the question is, are we going to change the situation with LinkedIn here in Russia? Because to date, this is actually the only professional network where professors, Western professors, have their accounts. And it's a very good question. So will we tap into this media? Will we become component of the global network? We cannot live without access to the global network. Russian science, German science, or French science cannot exist by itself. Otherwise, it's not a science at all. There are national scientific movements, and we have supported recently Science ID project, which is seen as a Russian project with the potential to be developed within the framework of BRICS and Euro-Asian Union. So that platform should have global capability. That's the statement of work. We should not be focusing on ourselves when we are building an advanced solution. So that creates export opportunities. It's about exporting practices, exporting regulatory practices, and exporting culture. Any sort of communication platform like this implies export of your standards and regulations, and that comes before export of technologies and products. What is this product about? It's about building a communication platform for scientists, but ministry has got involved into the project, and they have suggested that we should be building a platform for communications between scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs, because we need them all to move this project ahead, and we should not be focusing solely on scientists. Speaker is speaking off the microphone. Microphone, please. Well, I hear what you're saying. I got your point. But I think it is important to be mindful of the format in which the data is stored. Like, for example, decision was made about publishing all scientific journals, and um, but the, there is a robot converting this information, and if you're not registered in e-library, you will not be able to read anything from that library. So there should be rules, and Dmitry mentioned those rules in his first presentation. Open access information should not require any registration or any sort of log on. If you don't, but if it is private, then it is private, and probably we should not be supporting these initiatives since they are being developed privately. Anybody else? I have a concern. So I'm listening to all these talks and these opinions, and I think we are forgetting but one truly important thing. But that thing is always there. And the history of mankind there has that sort of, let's say, Babylon warning. So the constructors of the Tower of Babel were punished by the god. But this is not the scientific information. It is not confirmed information, but we should be mindful of this. So that here is my point. What we see in our society today, and that means, let's say, acceleration of informational metabolism. The world becomes increasingly more connected. It becomes increasingly more active. Will it not result in an explosion at some day? So I'm probably taking it to the extreme point, but the example of the Tower of Babel is a good one. Shall we think better about what we are doing now, and shall we think about the consequences of our present day activities? I think we should. And I think we're all getting to the point where knowledge will be integrated in the integrated domain. But we're not talking about the consequences. But we have just started building this tower. We have been building it for 20 years already. So we are building it horizontally. So there is no threat to the god. It's a Russian tower. It's a horizontal one, exactly. Let me make one comment also. I think it's exactly the point, and the question we have under the topic we discuss now is very relevant. So, as Sergey said, these issues can be resolved with the help of AI, but if we don't have AI yet, we can make big volume of data open, and that will alleviate the situation, because we're currently facing increasing complexity of scientific processes and increasing complexity of research. That's exactly what you mentioned by your reference to the story of the Tower of Babel. So it is clear that now we should have tools which will help analyze existing volumes of information, because let's say there is one person who is making decision about allocating financing to a company, or about scientific priorities. It is impossible to grasp all this information due to its complexity. So there should be some tools, automatic tools, which will be based on big data, because yes, if this data is available, if this data is in open access. But when you use Google, Facebook, or Yandex, you're not dealing with other people. You are dealing with AI first and foremost. And this AI is picking information which you're looking for in this vast ocean of available information. So the key challenge of the time is, how do we make sure that in scientific communication systems which were closed before, how can we open them up? And hundreds of billions of dollars were invested into these systems. How can we open them up and bring them to the standard of Google, Altmetric, and whatever it is there? How do we make sure that present-day technologies can be used for our benefit, not only for the benefits of the regulators? How do we make sure that we can start initiatives of our own? How do we make sure that we can come up with innovative products in the area of where we do? But that's not all. We need responsibility and the state of limitations. Because, well, look, you can put any sort of information into available now. Let's say information about how to build a bomb. Like any person reckless enough can make a chemical formula available and nobody will see it because that person is not being cited, is not being referred to. But that formula will be available. We need responsibility. Technology is just part of this equation. We need to develop the social institutions. We need to be mindful of the fact that we live in explosive environment. Okay, thank you. Just 2 or 3 other brief comments and we will move on. My name is Alexandra Borisova and I'm from Edmo University. And talking about inevitability of online integration, I have a very inspiring example. 2 years ago, we launched a course on scientific communication in our university. It's a course about interaction between scientists and non-professionals in the public. So this is a new discipline for us. It was focused on scientific PR people. So I traveled to Europe to establish liaisons with other universities, and they said we have an online course. It's better to do it in the form of a masterclass. And I kept telling them Russia is a very vast country. We cannot keep bringing people from Krasnoyarsk to Moscow physically, but we need to develop these competences. So they were quite skeptical. They were quite skeptical about it. It's okay. Kill us with your performance figures now. How do you mean? Well, how many people have been participating? 500 people in the last course, but this is a very narrow topic. And we have scientists signing up for this course also, not only their spokesmen. And world community of scientific communicators has woken up. And now they're talking about the need for this online course because they're saying, we're now in Germany here and you're in Australia. Well, there is a need for an online course. So you found yourself in the shoes of an innovator. Russia may find itself in a position of an innovator if it follows your example. Yes, well, it's effectively. Okay, that looks pretty simple.
It is not a smooth one. It goes in steps. We recognize this. We go in steps of progression. And Sergey and I have recognized that the smooth progression of the last 350 years started in the 1600s. And we've been, over the course of those 350 years, been building these vertical establishments that encapsulate the expertise of librarianship and publishing and curatorship. But we are now at a stage where the investment in those vertical towers is reaching its final stages, and at some stage there will be a collapse of those vertical towers. What we need to protect ourselves to make sure that we carry on with the progression is to build those connectivity, to encapsulate the expertise in new technologies, in the big data, but also in the open, interoperable technologies that mean that even when our big towers have reached their final stage, we can build new towers from their rubble.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we move to the next one. The next topic. Следующая тема у нас это открытая наука.
Our next subject is open science, and the question I would like to ask to the speakers is this. What new opportunities are presented by new platforms for scientific communication? So new platforms and new media. So Greg.
Certainly. First of all, the benefit of going in the last section is that you actually can tailor your comments to make sure that you don't say anything stupid in front of the other speakers. The second problem is that the speakers may actually pull many of the things that you're going to say into their talks, which makes yours much shorter. But in this particular case, it's actually quite interesting because a lot of the things that I was going to share about SSRN in the last 20 years that we've been freely sharing research dovetails very nicely with, you know, how do we start to bring these topics together, or how are we willing to experiment, an aggregated approach. But first of all, I do want to thank the forum itself, the organizers for the opportunity to be here, and my two new Russian friends, Varvary and Ivan, who have made this a much better trip than I could have ever imagined. So first of all, thank you. I was in Moscow in 2005, and it just continues to blow me away how much it's changed and evolved, which is probably a silly American comment, but it is an amazing city. So I am the managing director of SSRN, and SSRN started off about 20 years ago in the social sciences. And the idea, when I helped Mike Jensen found it, was that Mike Jensen was at Harvard University and at the University of Rochester, the business school, the Simon School. And there was a real difference in what he saw at each of those places. These were two very prominent, very successful US universities, and yet what he had access to at Harvard was significantly different than what he had access to at Rochester. And so the idea behind SSRN was to make information freely available. So our mantra is tomorrow's research today, but basically what we try to do is freely allow authors to submit content and readers to download content. We have a freemium model that makes it sustainable without any other funding around that. That's not the topic for today, but it's a sustainable business model that's worked pretty well for the last 20 years. I personally am an accountant by training. Spent my early career at KPMG. And the nice thing about being an accountant is that you understand costs and you also understand benefits. And so the thing about SSRN was that we've never ever been able to waste the resources that we had. Being a commercial enterprise, we had to get up in the morning and provide value to our customers every single day for the last 20+ years. So regardless of who pays, whether it's the government, a foundation, a funding entity, or customers, we still think that you have to provide value on a daily basis to make sure that you have a place in this world, to provide value. So we've been around for 20 years, as I said. We actually joined with Elsevier, a large Dutch publisher, about 20 months ago. And the reason was, in this game, in this new world order, we realized that we didn't have the resources to be able to do what we wanted to do, to fulfill our mission of making research as freely available as possible. We cover about 30 disciplines. We started in the social sciences and then the humanities. And in the last 7 months, we've added biology, chemistry, women's and gender studies, and engineering. A couple of data points. We have about 800,000 papers from 350,000 authors. And we get 70,000 new submissions every year. And we have about 50,000 revisions. So the idea behind SSRN is to get the research in early as possible, and help it evolve. I can't remember, I think it may have been, Alex may have said it, or somebody else said, it's this concept of speeding up research, but also failing faster. If I can share an idea and get feedback on that idea, I don't then spend 6 months getting funding and 6 months writing a paper and 6 months getting it published, or 6 years getting it published to find out that I could have learned that it wasn't a good idea early on. So our focus is to share these ideas, the early stage research, as early as possible. So what used to be the funnel where everything dripped out at the end of a peer-reviewed article, and that's where all the value was, we've tried to elongate this process all the way back up the funnel. Preprints, conference proceedings, working papers, idea papers, and we just recently, in the last few months, added the concept of ideas. So that as a researcher, I can share this idea of what I'm thinking about, or the question I'm about to ask, or the funding that I need, or the data that I have, and see if there's other people to collaborate on a global basis. Because there is no country anymore that can do it on their own. We talk about open, and I don't want to be the naysayer because I believe in open. I've believed in sharing for many, many decades now. But there is an issue that more is not necessarily more, or more is not necessarily better. It's just more. And so the ability to curate the content, the ability to contextualize the content, the ability to put the content in front of the right people, the right amount, at the right point in time, we think is critically important. In data science, there's the concept of moving from data to information by providing relationships. and from information to knowledge by providing context, and from information to wisdom by providing principles. So we have
То есть у нас эти
context, and so what we're trying to understand is the principles so we actually can learn faster from this. As Mike said, Thomas Kuhn wrote about the history of scientific revolution and how quickly those towers start to fall, and they are falling much faster. So when I think about, what opportunities for scientific communication are available via these new platforms, I think of a conversation I had with Eric Brynjolfsson and his team at MIT Sloan several years ago. And Eric said that when you start to share this information faster, that across the board, we believe that we can increase scientific knowledge, the iterations, by 1/5. So we can solve these major problems 20% faster by broader sharing. That gets us up every morning. The Prime Minister discussed on Tuesday this concept of sharing intellectual capital and the importance of intellectual capital as a resource. So within SSRN, we want to share that. So SSRN and a number of the other platforms, there are incredible opportunities by sharing this intellectual capital globally. One of the things that we do is the cross-pollination of ideas. So traditionally, I would write a paper about an accounting subject, and it would go into an accounting journal. Today, within SSRN, I can put that into an economics journal, a corporate governance journal, a legal journal, so that the lawyer can see the way the accountant thinks and the economist can see the way the lawyer thinks. And so this concept of sharing across disciplines, sharing perspectives, we think accelerates research even faster. My final point is that I've spent a lot of time over the last 3 years thinking about scientific revolutions. And I've been doing this for a long enough time that I've actually been through a few of them. So I remember back in the 90s when we talked about digitization and the concept that it wasn't on the shelf, it was going to be on the computer, and boom, everything was going to get so much better. The publishers were going to be out of business and science was going to explode. It got better. It didn't happen, though. And then I've spent the last few years standing on podiums with people pounding on the lectern about how incredibly valuable open access is and how open access is going to make everything better and solve the problems. And again, it has helped. But as I think Sergey mentioned earlier, to me it's this third wave, and I crudely call it the YouTubification of research. And that's where anybody can create research, share it almost immediately, freely and broadly, and then we can start to figure out how to get feedback to that idea. Is it a bad idea? Move on. Is it a good idea? Could it be improved? And how do we start to build the tools around that to accelerate research that way? So when I talk to my team about how frustrated we all are that we don't have these answers, I say, if you want an answer, now's not the time to be in science. There is no recipe for what we are trying to accomplish, but the beauty is there's no wrong answers. We're all learning this together at a much faster pace than any of us would probably like. Thank you.
Together and simultaneously. Okay. Greg, but just one question from the moderator. Is it true that SSRN was acquired by Elsevier?
Yes, we joined Elsevier about 20 months ago.
Was it a complete acquisition, or did you retain part of the control?
It was a complete acquisition. We structured it so that SSRN as an entity would remain. We controlled pricing. We controlled a number of elements to continue SSRN as an entity.
For how many years?
For the foreseeable future. There's no change.
No 3-5 year, no.
No change.
You're still in control.
I'm still here.
Okay, good for you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, у нас есть второй.
Now we have a second speaker in our third round of discussions. His name is Sergey Barinov. He is here in his capacity as the director for research of CERN, and I know that he was involved in the creation of the social net system and in a number of other projects. So may I put the same question to him? What new opportunities for scientific communication these new platforms open up? Well, I hope that I haven't exhausted my time limit with my comments. So my story is about how small technological improvements in a scientific information system, a data processing system. Igor, you asked how you can call your system. Call it scientific information system. So how small technological changes lead up to an understanding that we are at the source of some qualitative changes that can cause a significant changes in our lives. I can tell you a story. We have a joint project with RANEPA, and I am responsible for the engineering side of the project. So what we do is that you read a PDF file of a research article, and the highlighted yellow are references to publications that have been included in the reference section of your publication. So if you click this highlighted portion of the text, and then you'll get a pop-up call out that contains information about the authors, about the content, about how many times it has been cited, either positive or negative information, or if this citation was used for illustration, in other cases for criticism, or in any other aspect. So we were involved in this work, and then all of a sudden we understand that if we make another step forward, then maybe we'll give rise to a new revolution. So I'm partially joking. So I'm not serious about us causing a revolution, but you know, advance warning is always a good thing. So what we can do next? The first thing that comes to mind is that if we have localized the citations in the text, we know the authors, we know in our scientific information system, all texts are linked to the authors, and authors to the organization. So we know the contact information for the authors. So we can organize between the citation makers and the authors of the citation. We can establish a link between these groups of people. Clearly, not all citations require that, but there are cases when there is a lot of sense in making such links. So, for instance, you made a citation, and the result turned out to be wrong, was proven to be wrong. And if you have such a link, you'll be immediately notified and not bark up the wrong tree, so to speak. But if you cited an author and they've gotten new results, then you'll know about it immediately, and in your next publication you'll be able to use the new information to gain an edge over others. So when you include citations of some people, you can tell them, would you provide me this supporting information to that piece, and you'll gain, because you're getting a new citation. So we are on the threshold of creating a system for researchers that would be known as a trilateral informational partnership, when at the center we have a user, someone who uses information, on the other side the person who originates the user information, and we bring them together. And in real time, they'll be able to discuss their interests and meet their interests and so on. So, in fact, it would mean that if we give a scientist an opportunity to communicate on a working level, then on a working level, why would we need publication? Why do we need to publish something? We can circumvent them. We can have scientists communicate directly with each other without the publishing houses. But another point that's relevant here, if we start thinking along these lines, then we'll need to address the concept of cooperation, of collaboration. What mechanisms are relevant to maintain collaboration? So in here, there's a good example of all this. For instance, collaboration and cooperation, this is something that we know well about, how we work in a lab, in a project. When we contact each other in real time, we create a joint mental picture of what we are working on, and collectively we try to find the best solutions. If we are able to come up with technologies that would allow us to implement such arrangements irrespective of the physical locations of the people involved, we know how this collaboration needs to be organized. We need just go ahead and do it. But we'll need new social institutions and new rules of the game. And in conclusion, I'd like to point out, imagine a world where all these things have been implemented. The simplest thing, you don't have to write articles. The most difficult, I'm against that strongly. Okay, I'll keep this in mind. Well, your work is difficult. You can write articles, all right, I grant you that. But researchers won't have, they can avoid writing articles because copyright of an individual they don't exist anymore. It's always a team that gets copyright privileges, and we run into this on a daily basis. We already have this custom, this habit of doing work. We only need to think about how we can expand these things to cover the entire professional space. So we are at a point where I need to speak up as a moderator. I apologize for grabbing the microphone. I'll be very brief so that other people are able to come up with their opinions before 5:30. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to try to tally up the results to summarize our discussion. I can present my own projects, but if you are interested in them, you can look up the PERM Federal Reserve, Federal Information System. But as a researcher, I am in charge of a new media department at MGU, Moscow State University, and some concepts here are quite esoteric, developed by Vernadsky. They smell of scientific history, but to me it was quite good because it was a normative theory. It does not describe what is, it describes how things should be, things that we need to strive to. And being an engineer, a telecommunications engineer, I am trying to figure out what the society is missing in order to get into the state of noosphere that Vernadsky wrote about. So we are working on redundancy, so the reliability of the system so that it's able to transmit information not only through space but also through time. So we are designing, and we have discussions on that a lot. We are designing systems that would allow to store information and not get lost once it was published. We deliver 5 new opportunities or 5 new features. First of all, the possibility of open publication. So for 50 years ago, an open publication would be ravens. Where do we need to publish? Where can we publish? Because in the past, they simply didn't have the medium for open publishing. There was no policy that would encourage open publishing. The only publishing forum was a journal, and they had to be either subscribed to or you could scan your article and send copies to your friends. But now that we get this space, this seed of the noosphere, so this was my first point. The second point is that we can have versions of the system. So if someone makes a mistake, an error in a publication, or there are, like in Wikipedia, there are lots of edits in Wikipedia, and they say that Wikipedia is not accurate, is not precise, but those guys in science, they would read an article and they assume that everything is correct. In my articles, 5,000 people read them, and if there's the slightest error, there's an uproar. So, but how can you get a good quality? If you get just 2 peers to review your article, then how reliable are their comments? Because when we published books and they stayed unchanged, because this is what traditional media were. Now we need to publish living books that would develop together with the author, together with the discipline. And we had an idea with Springer, but they didn't quite get what I wanted from them. So new collaborative opportunity, collaboration, we mentioned that. We also talked about ratings, and Sergey would never have banned LinkedIn. I know him too well. He would use it, but LinkedIn was banned for other reasons, and we can only speculate why LinkedIn, of all things. Maybe there's some special dislike toward LinkedIn. Again, it's not. It's your hypothesis. It's not scientific knowledge. So it's an unknown. It's a hypothesis. Maybe Microsoft didn't pay someone. We don't know. Why would be involved in guesswork? But opportunities for collaborative work do not depend on LinkedIn. Google Docs is the best example. I'm wearing a t-shirt from a Chinese university. China is great in terms of innovation. They do not have collective editors, and people would think not just twice but 100 times before they say something. So don't worry about China. So in order to get a big breakthrough, we need a policy that people are not scared, so that they're able to publish their results without being afraid for every word that I'm going to get kicked out of the party. So the fourth point is a new trajectory for development and socialization for young researchers. It would be important to understand that this principle of generations, when at 13 and 14 years of age, people start thinking about which university they are going to go and so on. So if we talk about successful people during the school period, people can get involved, at least on the approaches to the fields where they want to make a contribution. And in my view, the open nature of those platforms, and for instance, Facebook, it doesn't know how old you are. You declare your age yourself. You can declare 50 years of age, but you may in fact be 15. So if you can look like a reasonable conversationalist, it would open up opportunities for various people from various countries of various age groups. All this creates new tools for socialization, and we need to have a system of lifelong contests or competitions. And people from the ministry are torturing eager. What do they mean? They want a long-term system that would help them support talent. Well, if the technologies are good, if we have open platforms, then such things would happen on their own. So what is important, that people have their motivations and there are opportunities to integrate them. It's not so hot right now, but it's great. I remember being 14. I started working when I was 14, and I was more like an exception. But now I understand anyone can get involved in research, citizen science, as they call it. So anyone can be involved in all sorts of research, and our greatest hope is what I liked about you, Sergey, is your analogy with the Tower of Babel. Well, colleagues translate everything with machine translation, so indexing things and plagiarizing is fought with similar tools. But we have a more serious hope here. We can recall certain things. So if you were involved in the study of our human culture, we know too little about ourselves, and in different disciplines people know something, but the oldest sources are just 7,000 years old, so we do not know what had happened before. And we resemble a person who comes about after a car wreck, and we can't remember what happened before the road accident, if was there a flood, and so we can only know if we integrate all the data in a single field. And this process is just beginning, is just starting to unfold, but our hopes may be granted, but provided that we reach a consensus. What would the rules of the game be of this open science thing, so that we do not have attempts to take ownership of information, to close it up for other people, I think this could be a great regulatory concept.
So I do hope I was brief enough and I was not abusing my position of a moderator. So we have time till 5:30 and I can give you a microphone for a comment if you like. Sergey, I've interrupted the comment of your colleague and we have a guest here, but I'm from I'm from Moskovskaya Pravda. What you have just said. So Mrs. Chernigovskaya in her talk was also quite gloomy, but what I've heard today is actually a breakthrough, and it is pointed against a very dangerous stereotype. So I will ask a question to Mr. Matveev. Well, two questions, in fact. They are quite important for me. So why scientists found themselves in shoes of conservative people? Why they turned conservatives? How can we get value out of this growing amount of data? Like in genetic studies, for example, we can hardly process a fraction of the data which is currently available. But do not take it as a complaint. Because rewriting and anything else takes place out of the context of existing information. And you also mentioned information exchange in the smoking room, and now we can exchange information via social media. So, but this is in fact an old type of communication. On the wall of the temple in Novgorod, people also used to write things and communicate. But actually, social media present a technology which can substitute a nuclear bomb in its power. So this is dual application technologies. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion.
Как ответ? Да. Ну, пока не суд. Wait, he's answering, and then you.
Почему ученые оказались консерваторами?
So why scientists turned conservative? That's a difficult question, and I think it's the origins of the answer lies in psychology. Being a scientist means being a positively deviative person who is breaking a law, who is pushing the limits, who wants to become significant, who wants to become self-sufficient, who wants to be sure about his significance. It is very difficult to open yourself up to the world because you start facing people who don't understand you, and that is extremely demotivating. Open yourself up means stand up in front of an audience and start telling them something which they have no idea about. This is painful. This is demotivating. It is easier to break science up into components or into fragments and sectors. And now we have, let's say, thousands of different subdivisions. Each of these subdivisions was originated by a great man in that particular area. But the world is changing. It has changed. And your second question, how do we make value out of this growing volume of information? Well, you need to use your gut feeling, use your intuition. In some cases, you need to stop being rational and start trusting your gut feeling. Remember, we taught our kids before to learn more information, but when it comes to analytics now, I think it is important to properly set your internal analytical filters. Become an intuitive analytic, in other words. Just make sure that you check the right boxes and you deactivate out-of-date filters, otherwise they will become a barrier. Thank you very much.
University of Montreal, Canada. The first thing, I have two remarks. The first is to underscore the fantastic work SSRN is doing. It may not look like much, but when you get this message every month, you're among the 10th most quoted author, that sort of thing. This encourages people to share. What we have to realize is that as you make this stuff available, at some point we're going to have information overload. And then the old saying, I think, forget who said this, point of view is everything on the internet. Find your way in all this information. What do? We should focus on how that's happening. Through SSRN, I can trace another author. But at some point when I want to look at general things, I want to jump from there into Wikipedia. I want to jump to that man's CV and hope that that man has all the publications available directly, either published or in pre-pub form, whatever. But point of view is everything. Let's help people make form their point of view better and faster. The other remark is about intellectual property. Now, of course, as a lawyer, that's something I know. You said we have all the tools, but think about it. Intellectual property is a compromise. Between the stimulus you want to give to the guy who creates something, and the impediment you're going to put on any further creation. The more we extend intellectual property, the stronger property rights we get, the more we are forcing people to invent their way, create a way around existing things. Now, if you look at the history of intellectual property, we have constantly been extending the reach of copyright. It's now life plus 70. There is no way that can be any stimulative effect beyond even 15 years. So maybe we should think in terms of giving you an initial copyright for a short time, maybe 5 years, 10 years. After that, you want it renewed, you ask for it. We have the database technology to make that possible. If you don't renew, public domain, so that it can be shared. Then within the copyright world, we should make it easier for people to dump things in the public domain. We have Creative Commons licenses. Let's generalize that system. Let's make it easier. Patent story, the same. If the patents are too strong, people have to work their way around it. I can see in pharmaceuticals where the development costs very high, copying costs very low, you want patents to stop. But there are stories about protecting software by patents. This is a disaster waiting to happen. This is an impediment on innovation. We shouldn't do that. We should get people more into open science. Even in the patent world, there are things on genetic research that are now being made public in a share economy. It can be done, apparently it can work. Thanks.
One very brief comment. Edison who said, perspective is worth 80 IQ points. The one thing that if I spent a lot of time in a lot of spaces, and if you are not following the remarkable work being done in the annotation space, you should. There's a bunch of standards coming out, but the hypothesis founder's a good friend of mine, and they've actually started to layer in, and we're going to start to beta test it later this quarter, but the ability for anybody to start to annotate the research so that I don't have to be an expert in that area, but another accountant can tell me what I should get out of this or start to make the connections across it. I think annotation's really going to be an important benefit to science, especially as we start to worry about information overload.
Аня Кулешова хотела высказаться еще, да, уже давно руку тянет, Ань, прошу.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I'm Anna Kuleshova, the head of Ethics Committee of Scientific Publications Department, and two brief comments from my side. The first one relates to the fact that today, as technology develops, we get lots of fabrications and simulations in scientific areas, like anti-plagiat system is showing that lots of publications are clean, but they are clean because they've been purged or purified by synonymizers and so on. The second point which I wanted to make, in 2017 was the first time in Russia when we built a database of publications which were taken out of the public domain, the forged publications. So those of you who are involved into open science activities, please be mindful of the fact that this database is there. It's for your benefit. And I wish you good luck. So we have another speaker here.
Yes. Okay, so you're the next. You're the next one. Okay, 1 minute. Okay, 1 minute. Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zenichev Yuri, and I will get back to what Mr. Sergeyev mentioned yesterday. We have fundamental science, and we have applied science, and we have practical application of scientific research. And I was all my life involved in applied science, and I also was working in an analytical department of a financial company, and afterwards management were our customers. They were using our analytical research. So you're talking about communication. So a scientist is sending something into the public domain, some results of the research. But we have not touched upon another problem. How does this scientist gets the publications he is interested for, the publications which he requires for his scientific activities? And we process data from databases of mass media and different organizations, and out of this ocean of information, we were picking up particular data pieces which were requested by afterwards leadership, like, for example, news reviews in central federal mass media or regional mass media, reliability ratings, safety ratings for banks, so information related to different companies. So if we add a tool which will allow each particular researcher to pick up the data which we require out of the entire volume of available information. So if scientists will get the tool for picking up relevant bits of information, then this ocean of information will not finally result in an information overload or overcharge. And so the combination of being able to send your information and get referred to with a tool which can help you pick up relevant bits of information will help a lot. Okay. Мартин, ваш комментарий, что вы хотели сказать, вы следующий.
Go ahead. Yes. You. Yes. Yes.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, I have.
Погромче можно?
One on. I heard during the discussions also sometimes how do we make sure that the knowledge that we publish is also shared with the general public. And I'd like to mention here that we have the possibility for authors and people who have access to our content platforms to share a version of the articles with anybody out there, except it's not downloadable. You can read it, but you can't download or print it. But still, I think it's an important point, and you can also put it in newspapers and so on, that you can share knowledge more broadly with others, and that's based on ReadCube technology. The second point I briefly like to mention is about the ocean of information that was just mentioned, and here we also have another free service that we have built together with Digital Science, which is SciGraph. SciGraph is a database with a lot of metadata, not only around the articles, but also around subjects, about taxonomies, chapters, but also about organizations and funders and publishers, universities, about persons and grants. And this is basically a machine-readable version of all that metadata, and it can help you to better analyze, using a machine, of course, then, to analyze all the to embark on this ocean of knowledge that is out there. Both of these are openly available and may help you to answer some of the points that were addressed.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. And who is going to be the last one? Кто последнее слово скажет? Вопрос можно, но это будет последний вопрос.
You can ask a question if you want, but that would be the final question. It will probably be left unanswered. Be ready to that. So what?
Martin, it sounds like a joke, actually.
What I just told?
Yes, but will Sage, someone has a question for you. Will Sage beat Springer, whatever that is?
Well,
no.
No.
Okay, well, you should say no, because you're from Springer.
I know, but in the Netherlands we say you never know how a cow catches a rabbit.
Okay, okay, you're smart. Thank you very much. Yes, okay, thank you very much. Послушайте, спасибо огромное всем.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the participants. It was an excellent discussion. We should all thank the Department of Informational and Scientific Development of RANEPA, because they have come up with really relevant topics. We've pulled interesting speakers together. We had an excellent talk. I would like to thank you all. Thank you all for your attitude to this. Thank you very much. And I do hope seeing you here on Gaidar Forum 2019. Thank you.